Next week, and also at the very end of the course, you're going to be giving a presentation. Now, don't worry about the one next week, but the one at the end of the course is worth 12% of your grade. And a lot about giving a really good presentation is about how you actually deliver the information and make your slides. So what I've put together is a little PowerPoint that's going to talk about what makes a really good presentation and not so good presentation, and some things that you should really avoid. And a lot of this is a matter of opinion, but do keep in mind that because I'm the one that's going to be grading your presentation, you might want to pay attention to what I personally think makes a great presentation so that you can make sure you score really highly. All right, so we all know what it's like to sit through a really terrible presentation, and hopefully you've not felt this during biology, but there must be some times when you've sat there and you've been thinking, oh, this is just going on forever. And there'll be some things that I'm doing that's going to contribute to that. So remember that you're going to be doing something different. You're going to be presenting really cool information in a short 10-minute presentation to the class, whereas I'm trying to teach you things and go over complex stuff. So I often won't follow a lot of these rules, but still keep in mind as I'm talking in class what your is helping you learn and understand and pay attention, and what is not helping, and then you can kind of adjust your own presentation skills in response to that. So I'm just going to talk about how to make an effective talk, and then how to engage your audience and keep them entertained and paying attention to you, and some of the things that you can do to avoid them kind of switching off, and then also just a few tricks that you can do in PowerPoint. And you'll probably use Google Slides, and you can do a lot of the same things in Google Slides. You just might have to Google how to do it in Google Slides. So I'd like you to pause this video now and think really carefully about when you've seen a lecture or a presentation that you actually felt engaged or you enjoyed watching. What was it about that presentation that made you feel like that? Likewise, if you've ever seen a presentation that you really didn't enjoy and you just wish you weren't there, what was going on in that presentation? I think it's important for you to pause and think about that right now. All right, so hopefully you've come up with some pros and cons, or what makes a good presentation and what makes a bad presentation, and we're going to cover some of those things. All right, so the first thing you want to do is start with a clear title slide, and the reason being is that you're going to be setting up, you're going to be standing there waiting for me to get ready, waiting for your class to start looking at you, and you just want to have a simple slide with your name on and what you're going to talk about. And this allows you to adjust the amount of time that you can talk for. And a lot of the tips I'm going to give you is going to be about being able to adjust the amount of time that you can spend on the slide, because you're going to be timed and you need to stick to a time limit. And so being flexible is a really great thing that you can insert into your presentation. So this is a PowerPoint that I use when I talk about my PhD research, and I'm going to use some slides to it as I go along this talk. And you'll see the first one, it's just got my name, before I was married, and then university, and a picture of this beautiful little bird called a Whinchats, and that's it. So I recommend you start with something like this. Have a really cool picture that kind of summarizes your PowerPoint. All right, so also what you want to do is don't surprise your audience at any time. If you think about sitting through a presentation, you often want to know what's coming up, and so if you can tell your audience what's coming up, that's going to help them stay engaged, and also help them with any questions, and they'll be like, oh, I don't really know about this topic. Well, they know that you're going to tell them and explain to them later on. So tell them what you're going to tell them, and then at the end you probably want to summarize, because this makes your talk really memorable. It's not as important when you give a short talk like yours for 10 minutes, but if you tell them what's coming up, it keeps them engaged, they're not guessing what's coming up, and at the end you can have some really key points that makes your talk nice and memorable. All right, I want you to pause the slide again, this video again, and I want you to think about what is a really bad slide, or what would be a really good slide. Okay, Who likes this slide? This is a horrible slide. Please don't do this. And what's even worse is when you get to a presentation and someone shows you a slide like this and then they start reading it and you're like, oh, this is going to suck. So don't paste a load of information on the board. Actually, all you want is these little summary sentences, like truncated sentences, that is basically a prompt for you, because the presentation is you. You're the one giving the presentation, and your slides should just be a kind of a prompt for you, or a bit of a visual aid for your audience. So never really have like long sentences. And the key thing is that if the audience is going to be reading the slide, which they'll do, if you put writing up there, they're going to read it. They're not listening to you. And it's not that you're boring. It's just if someone puts writing in front of you, you're going to read it. And you'll see that when I give presentations and during this little video here, I'm controlling what you see. So I'm using the animation feature to animate text one by one. And you can do that in Google Slides as well. Because if I put all of this up, you would read all of it, and then I'd get to like the third point, and you would have missed what I said about points 1 and 2. And less is more, really, really less is more. So even here, I could have just written less is more. I don't even need when it comes to presentations, because we're talking about presentation. I mean, it's not needed. So just less is more. You can just say one thing at a time, and you can be the one that says, so you can control what they see with text animations, etc., etc. So have like the sentences in your head that you say, and the slide is just like a prompt for you. So this is a picture that summarizes that really horrible, nasty slide with all the text on it. And it's basically showing comparative anatomy of mammals that shows that they have the same bone structure, which shows that they evolved from a common ancestor with this bone structure. And the reason why their limbs look different, even though they've got the same bones in there, is because they've been shaped through evolution, because they've got different, what we say, selective pressures acting on them. So the bat, for example, has evolved to fly. The cat has evolved to walk on its forelimbs, where we use our forelimbs for grasping, so they've got a slightly different shape. And the whale has to swim through water. And we know whales are mammals because of this bone structure. Also, if you look at how a whale swims in relation to a fish, you'll see that the spine of the whale goes up and down and the fish goes side to side. Well, the cool thing about this slide is that I can adjust how long I talk for. I could go on and on about this forever, and I won't. But let's say if I'm being timed and I've got 10 minutes and I'm on this and I've been talking for 8 minutes, I could just really quickly summarize it. Or I could go into a lot more detail if I had time. So your slides are going to be cues. You expand on your talk when you're using your slides. You shouldn't have everything that you're going to say up on the slide, because then what's the point of you standing there talking? They could just read the slide. And use pictures to save on words. Pictures really, really help, and they help you be flexible. Now, people use notes. I don't actually add notes to presenter view, but I'm going to show you this view on the next slide called presenter view. And you'll use my computer whenever you're giving a presentation, because I know it's going to show you this. So that slide that says the evidence for evolution, that's what you see on the board as a member of the audience, but I see this. So the one that says effective talks, that's this here. This is what I see next in the slide. Okay, this is the next slide coming up is what I mean. This is how long I've been talking for here. So you'll have a timer. This is just the time of the day. And then here is if I want any notes. I don't really recommend that you use notes, because if you know what you're going to say, you'll give a much better presentation and you're not staring at the screen. And then here, if I was like, oh, the students fell asleep, then I can just write that in for later, so notes. But you want to kind of focus on this time here and then kind of what's here and what's coming up. Just because pictures are good doesn't mean that all pictures are good, so you need to be able to explain your picture and not have your audience staring at it for like half an hour trying to figure out what's going on. Now, if we were having some kind of economics meeting, we might put this up and talk about it for half an hour, but this is a terrible, terrible PowerPoint slide, so just because it's a picture doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good picture. So keep your pictures simple and make sure you can explain them. Doesn't mean that you can't use complex figures. I use complex figures, and I can just walk through it. So for example, when I went to Nigeria, what I did is I looked at birds during the wintering period. So let's say last winter I would have gone there, and then the next winter, so this coming winter, I go back and see, have any birds come back, any birds that I was following, and I put these unique little rings on them so I can see who's who. They've got different colours, so one bird is like blue, orange, blue, and one's red, yellow, red, or whatever. So I can identify the individual birds. And this graph is basically saying, well, across all the birds I followed, just over half of them came back the next winter, so survived over the summer in Europe. And there was actually no difference depending on whether the bird was male or female, and whether it was a first winter bird, it has never been to Africa before, it's first time in Africa, or whether it's an adult that had been many times before. And you can figure out the ages of birds based on their feathers. So this is basically saying that age and sex has no impact on the probability of a bird coming back the next winter. So yeah, that's me. I can walk you through this slide. You don't have to stare at it and try and figure it out for yourself. Another example of a slide where I could have written a load of information, but instead I've given pictures, I've shown the species I'm looking at, what kind of studies have been done on various parts of the ecology and biology of these birds. So I looked at stopover and wintering ecology, and you can see there's not actually much been done. Again, I can talk for longer, or I could just move on, which I'll do. Generally, when you're making PowerPoints, 1 minute or less per slide is a good rule, but it kind of depends on how much information is in there. So it's not a hard or fast rule, it's just a guideline. If you've got a 10-minute presentation, you've got 25 slides, you probably want to cut some out. Don't make slides too complicated. Less is more, really. Trust me. Don't have long sentences or paragraphs. Just have bullet points. You can have truncated sentences. And then your pictures are going to help you save words as well, and help your audience kind of switch over to looking at you instead of staring and trying to read the screen. But again, make sure they're relatively simple. And then, as you can see, I'm animating your text. If I had put this all up in one go, you would have read it all and not listened to me. Not because you're bored, hopefully not, maybe you are, but because it's just human nature, you're going to read what's put in front of you, and you can't read something and listen to something else at the same time. And if you can, then you're a bit in a exception. Again, this is an example of pictures being used instead of words. So this is about my methods. So I caught birds in traps. I then put these unique little colour combinations on. So this is blue, white, metal, purple. This little birdie here, isn't it, cutie pie? I put these little rings on them. And then you can age them. This is an adult male because it's got lots and lots of white here and lots of white here, and nice beautiful feathers, and nice and dark. If it was a juvenile bird, it would have really scratty feathers and not very much white. And here's a female, it's not got very much white on it. Again, I can talk for a long time about this slide and probably keep you, quite engaged, or I can just move on. So this is a really great way of adjusting how long you can talk for. Another example, I'm just going to move on because I think I've made the point. Alright, so make sure you've got lots of information in your pictures. Just because you've got simple slides doesn't mean you can't have lots of information in there. So this is I love this figure because this is very simple, but it has loads and loads of information on it. So this is the return rate of my birds. 54% came back the next year. Here's a reminder of what they look like. Aren't they cute? These are the territories of the birds during a winter. So I went out and I saw these birds and I wrote down their colouring combinations. And when I plotted this on a map, you can see that they have these little territories, which are really cool. Look at these little territories. And they've got different sizes. And then I can look at things like, well, these big ones, are these males? Are these females? Or are these juveniles? It turns out there's no difference in territory size. It's actually related to the features in the territory, like how many bushes are there and things like that. But, again, I could talk for longer. I could just move on. These ones with the red circles, well, these are birds that came back the next winter in this study site. All right. I know there's loads of pretty pictures out there. I know there's loads of cool fonts and loads of different colours, but don't do it. Just keep it simple. You'll notice all my slides have got just a light coloured background. They've got dark text in a really easy font to read. It's consistent. I have the same font, the same background. So don't fall into the trap of sticking a load of pictures on everything, because your audience just can't read it. And don't do Christmas, don't do like green on red, it makes your eyes go funny. You can do black background and white font. It's not as good, I don't think, as a white background and dark text, but if you want to do it, go for it. But don't be like Times New Roman on this slide and then I'm going to do Comic Sans. So keep everything consistent, make it easy to read, and then your audience is going to understand what you're trying to communicate to them and listen to you. Don't center the text, just makes your eyes go funny. And be consistent. See, I'm animating the text. Helps me as well. And avoid clutter. Don't put loads of pictures everywhere. Pictures are good, but don't crowd your slide. If the audience is reading the slide, they are not listening to you. Okay, animations. You can get really into animations and do some really cool stuff, but remember, if you're making your slide really complex, your audience isn't going to be listening to what you're saying. You can use animations. Like I used animations when I was doing that dehydration synthesis, and I think that hopefully helped you understand what was going on, so there was a value to it. But again, just make sure that you don't overload it. And videos, you are giving the presentation, so I would like you to avoid videos unless they're extremely short and extremely useful for your presentation, and we'll talk more about that in class. Here's one example of what I think is an effective animation. So here is this part of the world. There's England. I live there, or used to live there. Yay. And then this is Africa, obviously. This is a Sahara Desert, very hot. This is Nigeria in this kind of area here, and this is Jos, where I was studying the birds. All right, so what this is the average date that the birds left Nigeria to fly to Europe. And the first bird left on the 28th of March, and the last bird left on the 28th of April. And these are the birds that I'm following with those colour rings on. So, I can go out and see if they're still there or not, because they've got rings on their legs of pretty colours. So I can animate their migration routes, because I put these little trackers on them so I could track their migration routes, which was really cool. So I can animate that. And they left, and then whee, there they go. And they arrived around, on average, the 5th of May. Earliest bird arrived on the 24th of April, and the latest was the 19th of May. So on average, it takes them just 20 days to fly these thousands of miles, and they actually fly this route from Nigeria, from Central and Western Africa, over the Sahara Desert in non-stop without stopping, and they only weigh like 14 grams, which is amazing, because they're birds and they're amazing. And then they they stop here and eat more food, and then they hop over here to Italy, and then they fly here, and then they have babies. And then when they fly back, they actually go back this way, because the winds are going around in a circle like that, so they're flying in the direction that the winds help them. If the winds were blowing south to north, then they wouldn't be able to fly this way very well, so they probably go this way, but they go around like that. So again, I could go on forever, I will spare you, but an example of why pictures and animations can actually help. All right, another animation. Where did the birds come back to? Did they come back to the same territories or different territories? Let's animate and transpose those territories back on top from 2 different winters. They came back to the same territory. So not only are they like 14 grams, they fly thousands of miles to Russia and then have kids, and then they fly all the way back again, but they fly back to exactly the same bush, which is amazing. All right, more animation. Okay, just last but not least, I want to talk about presentation skills. So you've all sat there with someone presenting, and they're just staring at the board, and they're just reading the slides, and it's just really boring, or they're really quiet, or they're not looking at you. So presentation skills is all about practicing and confidence. And, I have practice now, so I'm a lot more confident. And if I make a mistake, I can kind of roll with it. Or I'm okay with just going, oh, you know what, let's just start again. The more you practice, the better you'll get and the more confident you feel. It's all about feeling confident. So speak clearly and slowly. Don't just turn to a robot and read the slides or your notes. And you want to, they can read, your audience can read. If you can't read, probably shouldn't be in biology. You can all read. So don't just read your slides out. It's super boring. People are going to switch off. Face your audience. Now, if you're nervous, which a lot of you will be, and that's perfectly fine, what you need to do is just look at the back wall and talk to things at the back wall, like talk to the door handle, talk to the little models, or put the model of the bird at the back of the room if you want, and just talk to that, and it looks like you're facing the audience, and looking at them, and they won't know any difference. If you are nervous, it's okay. You won't lose a lot of marks, I promise. But the one thing you want to do is practice over and over again. Go in your bedroom or go into a room and actually physically make the words, actually talk. Don't just say it in your head, but go through the slides, make all the mistakes, keep going over and over it, and I promise it's going to make a massive difference. If you're confident and you know exactly what's coming up and exactly what you want to say, then your presentation will be amazing. I promise you, even if you're nervous. Now, I don't mean rehearse it to the point where you're talking like a robot and you know every single word by word, what you're going to say. I mean, have an idea, be able to elaborate. Like you can hear me elaborating here, and it's because I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm going to talk about on this slide. If I had just made this and tried to run through this, it would be all over the place and it'd be a total mess, and you wouldn't get as much out of it. So practice. You can use the lab room, you can use the lecture room, just let me know, and you can stand up and practice your presentation as much as you want. And critique each other. Get the rubric and critique each other and grade each other. Remember, your final presentation, 12% of your grade, that's over a letter score if you can bump that up. So you can do a lot. And you're going to have a time limit. Last but not least, give your audience the chance to answer questions, ask questions. I will ask you a question in your presentation, but I won't be mean about it. I'm not going to be the annoying professor person at the back of the room asking you a nitty-gritty question. Those of us who give presentations know those people and they're evil. So we're not going to do that. I'll ask you a simple question and you can always say that you don't know the answer. You can always have an educated guess. If you know your topic and you know your presentation, you'll be totally fine. Alright, so that was some tips on how to give a good presentation. I recommend you make some notes and follow these when you give your presentations. And remember, practice makes perfect.